young they got it bad cause I'm brown. And not the other color, so police think they have the authority to kill a minority.
Today, the United States has incarcerated more people than any other nation in the world. This is due to the privatization of prisons that hold 8% of America's inmates. With the expansion of the powers of law enforcement agencies across the United States in the late 1960s came a prison boom. Sentencing increased for some crimes, and other acts began to be considered crimes. For example, homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, and mental illness. Prisons were overcrowded, and there wasn't enough money for expansion or to build new ones. Normally, when a state wants to build a new prison, voters are asked to approve the costs. Many voters began to say no. In 1984, investors in Tennessee saw the lack of government resources as great business opportunity. They formed Corrections Corporation of America. They would use venture capital to build a new prison and then lease beds to the state. You just sell it like you were selling cars or real estate or hamburgers, one of its founders told Inc. magazine. Today, there are many private prison corporations with large political influences and connections. They maintain these connections by giving campaign contributions to officials who allow private prisons in their states. In addition, public officials themselves benefit because they can act with less responsibility to the public, since they do not have to pass bonds for the public to vote on. The private prison sector is also a career alternative for bureaucrats and public officials who want a raise, are looking to come out of retirement, or want stock options. Many of the corporations claim that they save taxpayers' money and run more efficient prisons. However, opponents of private prisons have said that they only care about maximizing their own profits. They reduce many necessary services in the prisons, like medical care, and cut staff to save money. Cutting staff puts the inmates, public, and staff themselves at risk. In addition, since they do not have to adhere to the same regulations as government organizations, they can pay a guard less than in a government prison. If guards are not getting paid enough, then it affects their work ethic. In 1998, a CCA prison in Ohio had numerous escapes, stabbings, and killings. The Justice Department conducted an investigation in which it found that the guards were poorly trained and that the CCA took in maximum security inmates in a facility that wasn't equipped to house them. Their only priority was making money off the inmates rather than making sure the correct procedures had taken place. Private prisons are still around because the pros seem beneficial to the government. These pros include: the government pays less money for a prisoner if they hand them off to a private company. Budget planning is easier because the government only has to pay a set amount of money. The private prison worries about if they have to pay extra costs for an inmate. Supporters say that private prisons are safer, offer better living conditions for inmates, and lower rates of repeated offenders. A study done at a private prison in Arkansas showed that only 19% out of 569 women that were released had reoffended. GEO Group is the nation's second largest for-profit prison operator. GEO is traded on the New York Stock Exchange. On any given day, almost 1.6 million people are sentenced to prison. And of those 1.6 million, 16% of them are held in private prisons. In order to enhance their profit, GEO is trying to create international contracts for prisons in Australia, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. Recently, GEO Group has felt that some parts of America are beginning to switch to cheaper alternatives, such as rehabilitation. Therefore, they feel the best way to increase their profit is to buy smaller companies with contracts in psychiatric care, civil immigration, detention, and electronic ankle monitoring for low-level offenders.
How the prison system affects minorities. In America, it is no longer a secret how the prison rates for minorities is 6 times as likely to be sent to prison compared to a white person in America. And together, both black and Latino men make up roughly 58% of the prison population. Even though the United States is considered to be the free world, it actually incarcerates more of its people than any other democratic country. Why is this? In The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, she writes about how the idea of race only came about to help implement the brutality of slavery. Once slavery ended and segregation was seen as morally wrong, the white race needed to implement another outlet to feel a false sense of control. This control became an increase of incarceration rates, especially during the times of the Civil Rights era. Civil rights activists were often compared to terrorists of the state and therefore could be held in prison. After Lyndon B. Johnson had signed the Civil Rights Act and segregation was seen as outwardly wrong, there needed to be a reason to send blacks to prison. The source was drugs, especially crack, because it was cheap. When President Ronald Reagan of the 1980s had declared a war on drugs, many Americans did not know exactly what he was talking about. At that time, drugs was not seen as an issue. But suddenly, when crack was seen in the hands of black people, many poor and upper-class whites alike had decided that it was a huge issue. Police were now given more funding and even military weapons in order to take down drug holders. And once they took down the drug holders, they were able to hold on to their possessions, such as money. In most countries, when a person is found with drugs, they are often sentenced to a few months in prison, and then they have to do time at a rehabilitation center. But in America, when people are found with drugs, they are often declared as felons. As a prisoner, you can be treated as a slave and can work for pennies or make no money, making school desks and clothes. Once a person is declared a felon, they are no longer able to work anywhere unless they do some menial work, which is not enough to provide for a family. Therefore, they are more likely to go back into the prison system, often for stealing in order to provide for their family. A recent study from UC Berkeley found that more people of color are sentenced to private prisons than white. This happens because private prisons want the least expensive prisoner to make the highest possible profit. Generally, white inmates are 50 years or older, while the persons of color are closer to 30 and under. A 2012 UCLA report found that it costs $68,270 to support a prisoner aged 50 or older, compared with $34,135 per year to house a younger prisoner. It is also important to note that the only reason private prisons emerged was due to the war on drugs because of the high rate of incarceration of mostly black males. In recent years, there have been an focus on illegal immigrants. Detention centers run by the same people who own private prisons are opening since there has been a decline in incarceration rates. They need to find a way to still make a profit. Recently, private prison stocks have soared due to President Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric. The Justice Department has plans to phase out the use of private prisons, but under Trump's administration, these plans have stopped even before they started. It is clear to see that private prisons are for profit only. They do not care about the safety of inmates or the general public. They only serve to encourage corruption and injustice. One example of this is the Kids for Cash scandal in 2008. The builder of private juvenile detention centers had bribed two judges to give too harsh sentences to children who committed minor offenses. These children were given extended stays in the detention centers to increase the number of residents and ensure the private prison got to receive more money from the government.
In order to improve our prison system, there must be action by the police force to not discriminate against minorities. The federal government must also be able to see criminals of nonviolent crimes as people who need help in order to help them lead a more successful life, because the statistics show that prisons do not necessarily keep a society safer. To help best increase the success of a society overall, it would be better for a person charged with drug crimes to enter rehabilitation, and while they are in rehabilitation, they can help their community. If they have any other financial instability, the court should help them find a job instead of declaring them a felon, because once declared a felon, you are seen as a label, and more likely end up back in the prison system for stealing.